In the shadowy corners of American history, there exist photographs so controversial, so challenging to the polished narrative of westward expansion, that they've been systematically removed from history books, museums, and public knowledge. Welcome to Uncovered Images. I'm your host, and today, we're venturing into territory few historians dare to tread, the underbelly of the Wild West through rare photographs that capture the raw, unfiltered reality of frontier life. These aren't the sanitized images you've seen in textbooks. These are the photographs they don't want you to see. The year was 1876. America celebrated its centennial with grand exhibitions showcasing progress and prosperity. But far from the festivities in Philadelphia, a different America was taking shape, one of lawlessness, violence, and moral ambiguity. The photographs we're about to examine tell that story, the one deliberately erased from our collective memory. Our journey begins in Deadwood Gulch, Dakota Territory. While most know it as the final resting place of Wild Bill Hickok, few have seen the photograph we've uncovered from the town's earliest days. Taken in July 1876, just days before Hickok's murder, this image shows the muddy main street lined with hastily constructed wooden buildings. But look closely at the shadows between those buildings. You can make out the silhouettes of armed men, watchful and ready. This wasn't just frontier justice. This was a systematic reign of terror orchestrated by a shadow government that controlled everything from mining claims to gambling operations. The photographer who captured this image was found dead 3 days later, his camera smashed. But this glass plate negative survived, hidden in a false bottom of his trunk for nearly a century. The official record states he died of typhoid, but a closer examination of this image reveals he may have captured something never meant to be seen. A meeting between a territorial judge and known members of the Al Swearingen gang, the notorious criminal enterprise that held Deadwood in its grip. Moving west, we find ourselves in Bodie, California. In 1879, Bodie was among the most dangerous places in America, with a murder rate that would make modern crime statistics pale in comparison. The popular narrative tells us these were simply the growing pains of a mining town. But this photograph, taken from the town's cemetery hill, tells a different story. Notice how the buildings are arranged not randomly, as most boom towns were, but in a pattern that suggests deliberate planning. The main thoroughfares are unusually wide for the period, and the larger structures on the north side all have clear lines of sight to the hills beyond. Why? Because Bodie wasn't just a mining town, it was a fortress, a stronghold for one of the most sophisticated criminal networks of the 19th century. This network, which we've traced through correspondence, bank records, and these suppressed photographs, operated what may have been the first organized crime syndicate in American history, predating even the Mafia's arrival. Their operations extended from San Francisco to Denver, with Bodie serving as their mountain headquarters. The town's legendary violence wasn't chaotic, it was calculated, designed to keep federal marshals and curious journalists away while they refined their operations. One photograph in particular haunts historians who have seen it. Captured in the winter of 1880, it shows what appears to be an ordinary town council meeting. But we've identified at least 3 of the men present as known bank robbers from Colorado, and another as a former Confederate intelligence officer. The man at the head of the table, partially obscured but recognizable by his distinctive watch chain, matches descriptions of Nathan Blackwood, a figure so thoroughly erased from historical records that until recently, many doubted he existed at all. Blackwood's operation wasn't just about robbing stagecoaches or controlling saloons. Documents we've uncovered suggest he was pioneering what would later be called money laundering, using Bodie's legitimate gold mining operations to process stolen bullion from heists throughout the West, then reintroducing it into the banking system through a network of corrupt officials that reached as high as the San Francisco Mint. This photograph disappeared from the Bodie Historical Society in 1937, shortly after a visit from federal agents. We obtained it through the estate of one of those agents, who kept it hidden until his death in 1986. His notes, which accompanied the image, express shock at the implications for our understanding of federal complicity and frontier criminality. Our next destination takes us to Tascosa, Texas, once known as the cowboy capital of the plains. In the early 1880s, Tascosa rivaled Dodge City and Tombstone for notoriety. But while those towns have been immortalized in countless westerns, Tascosa has been largely forgotten, deliberately, we believe, because of what happened there. This photograph, taken in 1882, shows Tascosa's main street on what appears to be an ordinary day. merchants, cowboys, and townspeople going about their business. But look at the building on the far left, the Exchange Saloon. The sign above its door bears a symbol recognizable to few today, but instantly identifiable to those in the know in 1882, the mark of the Shadow Riders. The Shadow Riders weren't just another gang of outlaws. They operated as a parallel government across parts of Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado. Their influence extended into legitimate businesses, law enforcement, and territorial politics. What made them unique, and dangerous enough to be erased from history, was their composition. Former Confederate officers, displaced Native American warriors, Mexican revolutionaries, and disillusioned Union veterans found common cause in this organization. Their goal wasn't just profit, but power, the establishment of what some documents refer to as a free territory outside federal control. Letters we've discovered suggest they were negotiating with foreign powers, including Mexico and possibly even Great Britain, for recognition should they succeed in carving out their own domain. This photograph captures what folklore dismisses as the Tascosa War, commonly described as a typical frontier dispute between ranchers. But our analysis reveals something far more coordinated. Note the positions of armed men on the rooftops, the barricades subtly positioned at strategic locations, and most tellingly, the flag visible at half-staff over the courthouse. This wasn't a spontaneous outbreak of violence, but a calculated insurrection. The photographer, a German immigrant named Friedrich Kleist, disappeared shortly after these images were taken. His equipment was discovered abandoned in a ravine outside town, but his body was never found. These negatives surfaced in 1924 when a construction crew demolished the old Exchange Saloon building and found a metal box sealed inside the cornerstone. The images were briefly held by the Texas Rangers before vanishing into private collections. We obtained this copy from a descendant of one of those Rangers, who kept it hidden for generations. Perhaps most disturbing is what happened to Tascosa itself. Within 5 years of this photograph, the town that once boasted over 1,000 residents was nearly abandoned. Official histories blame the railroad for bypassing the town, but our investigation suggests a more deliberate erasure. Land records show that properties were systematically purchased by shell companies traceable to federal agencies, including what would later become the Bureau of Investigation, the forerunner of the FBI. Were they hiding evidence of how close the Shadow Riders came to succeeding? The classified documents remain sealed, but these photographs speak volumes. As we move into the late 1880s, our journey takes us to a town few have heard of, despite its once notorious reputation. Panamint City, California, nestled deep in the Death Valley region, was one of the most remote settlements in the American West. This isolation made it perfect for what we believe was its true purpose. This photograph from 1887 shows what appears to be a typical mining town: false-fronted buildings, stamp mills processing silver ore, the usual establishments catering to miners' vices. But examine the structure on the hillside, just above the smokestack. Architectural historians we've consulted confirm it bears no resemblance to any known mining facility of the period. Its reinforced walls, narrow windows, and positioning suggest something else entirely: a fortress overlooking and commanding the town below. Documents we've uncovered from the personal papers of a Treasury Department investigator suggest Panamint wasn't primarily a mining town at all, but a sophisticated counterfeiting operation. The silver extracted from the surrounding hills wasn't just shipped to legitimate mints. Some was diverted to produce counterfeit coins of exceptional quality, virtually indistinguishable from official currency. The operation was reportedly overseen by a figure known in correspondence only as the Professor, believed to be a former engraver from the Philadelphia Mint, who disappeared after being implicated in a scandal in 1879. Under his direction, Panamint produced what may have been millions in fraudulent currency that entered circulation throughout the West. This photograph, showing what appears to be an ordinary group of miners, takes on new significance when facial recognition technology identified at least 3 of the men as known associates of counterfeiters operating on the East Coast. The technical expertise required for such operations didn't typically exist in frontier towns, unless they were specifically established for this purpose. What makes the Panamint operation particularly significant is evidence suggesting that at least some federal officials were aware of its existence and may have permitted it to operate. Correspondence between the San Francisco Federal Prosecutor's Office and Washington reveals reluctance to move against Panamint despite multiple reports of suspicious activity. One letter dated 1888 explicitly warns against any investigation that might disturb arrangements beneficial to certain national interests. Was Panamint producing counterfeit currency with tacit government approval? And if so, for what purpose? Some historians speculate this may have been an early example of economic warfare, with the fake currency intended for circulation in Mexico during a period of tense relations. Others suggest more mundane corruption, officials simply paid to look the other way. The town's sudden abandonment in 1889 coincides with a fire that destroyed most of its buildings, a fire that multiple accounts describe as suspiciously systematic, targeting specific structures while leaving others untouched. The photographer who captured these images, James Whitfield, described the fire in his journal as more reminiscent of a military operation than a natural disaster. Whitfield's journal entries stop abruptly 3 weeks after recording these observations. His fate remains unknown. Our investigation continues in Frisco, Utah, not to be confused with San Francisco. This remote mining town in the western desert experienced one of the most dramatic boom and bust cycles in Western history, growing from nothing to over 6,000 residents in less than 2 years, then collapsing just as quickly. The official history attributes this to the typical pattern of mineral depletion, but this photograph, taken in 1885 at the height of the town's prosperity, suggests something else entirely. Notice the unusual number of armed men visible on the streets for what was supposedly an ordinary business day. More telling is the group gathered outside the assay office, men whose attire marks them not as miners or local businessmen, but as representatives of Eastern financial interests. Our research has connected these individuals to what contemporary journalists called the Silver Ring, a consortium of bankers and politicians who manipulated silver prices through the 1880s. Frisco, we believe, wasn't just a mining town, but a pawn in one of the largest market manipulation schemes of the 19th century. The Horn Silver Mine, Frisco's primary employer, experienced a catastrophic collapse in February 1885. Officially recorded as an accident, our investigation has uncovered evidence suggesting deliberate sabotage. This photograph, taken just days before the collapse, shows unfamiliar equipment being transported into the mine after hours. Equipment mining engineers we've consulted identify as consistent with deliberate destabilization of support structures. More damning is this image of the town after the collapse. While showing the expected economic devastation, it also captures something extraordinary. Armed guards preventing residents from accessing their own homes and businesses, while men in suits oversee the systematic removal of documents from the town's bank and mining office. The photographer who documented these events, Thomas Sheridan, attempted to publish his images in Salt Lake City newspapers, but found every editor suddenly uninterested. His letters describe increasingly explicit threats, culminating in a visit from men claiming to represent government interests, who confiscated many of his plates. Sheridan died 3 months later in what was ruled a hunting accident, despite occurring in his own home. The images we're showing survived because Sheridan, growing increasingly paranoid, had hidden duplicates beneath the floorboards of his darkroom, where they remained undiscovered until a renovation in 1967. The contractor who found them kept them private for decades, fearing what he described as powerful interests that might still be concerned about their contents. What these photographs suggest is nothing less than a conspiracy to manipulate national silver prices by deliberately destroying one of the country's most productive mines, a scheme that enriched certain Eastern banking interests while devastating countless Western communities dependent on stable silver values. As the frontier era drew to a close, our final stop brings us to Thurmond, West Virginia. Not technically in the West as commonly understood, but a town that embodied the same lawless frontier spirit well into the 1890s. Nestled in the New River Gorge, Thurmond became one of the wealthiest towns per capita in America during the railroad boom, with millions in coal money flowing through its banks annually. This photograph from 1895 shows Thurmond in its heyday. The prosperity is evident. Well-dressed citizens, substantial buildings, all the trappings of civilization. But look closer at the hotel on the right side of the frame. The Dunglen Hotel was legendary for housing the longest-running poker game in American history, a game that continued uninterrupted for 14 years. What's not in the official history is what our investigation has revealed about that game. It wasn't merely recreation for wealthy coal barons. It was a cover for what may have been the most consequential financial conspiracy of the Gilded Age. Documents we've uncovered from the personal papers of Senator Johnson Camden, a key figure in West Virginia politics of the era, suggest the Dun-Glen game served as an unofficial stock exchange, one operating outside federal oversight or public scrutiny. Here, controlling interests in railroads, coal operations, and land companies changed hands based not just on cards, but on information unavailable to regular investors or government regulators. This photograph, showing the hotel's main gaming room, captures several figures whose presence together raises alarming questions. We've identified representatives of the Vanderbilt, Morgan, and Rockefeller interests, ostensible competitors, meeting in what Camden's papers describe as harmonious arrangement of territorial matters. In modern terms, they were dividing markets and fixing prices on a scale that affected the entire national economy. More troubling is the presence of at least 2 federal judges and a Treasury official, all participating in games where the stakes included regulatory decisions directly benefiting the industries represented. The photographer Walter Pierce was employed by the hotel itself and had unprecedented access to these gatherings, apparently considered too insignificant to pose any threat to the powerful men he documented. Pierce's collection of images disappeared following his death in 1911, reportedly seized by agents of the Bureau of Corporations during early antitrust investigations. This copy emerged from the estate of one of those agents, whose conscience apparently troubled him enough to preserve evidence that was otherwise systematically destroyed. The implications of these photographs extend far beyond Thurmond itself. They suggest that much of what we understand as the natural development of American industrial capitalism was in fact deliberately orchestrated by a small group of men meeting regularly in a remote West Virginia hotel beyond the reach of public accountability or legal oversight. Thurmond survived long after most boomtowns faded, but the power consolidated in these poker games shaped American economic development for generations, creating monopolies and political machines whose influence continues to this day. As our journey through these suppressed images concludes, a pattern emerges, one of deliberate erasure and historical manipulation. The Wild West we've been taught to remember is largely a fabrication, a carefully curated narrative that omits the most revealing truths about power, wealth, and the true nature of American expansion. These photographs, hidden, suppressed, and in some cases actively destroyed, offer glimpses of a different reality. They show not just individual outlaws operating at the fringes of society, but sophisticated networks of power and corruption that linked frontier saloons to Washington corridors, banking houses to remote mining camps, and ostensible enemies in surprising alliances. Why have these images been systematically removed from our historical record? The answer lies not just in the events they depict, but in what they reveal about the foundations of modern America. The fortunes established during this era, often through means these photographs document, formed the basis for dynasties that continue to shape our economy, our politics, and our society. The mechanisms of this historical erasure deserve attention in themselves. Photography in the 19th century was not yet the casual medium it would later become. Each image required significant investment of time and resources. Photographers were often business people as much as artists or documentarians, selling their services to those who could afford them. This economic reality meant that many frontier photographers relied on patronage from the very power structures their images might incriminate. Those who broke this unspoken contract often found their careers, and sometimes their lives, cut short under mysterious circumstances. More systematic was the role of historical societies established throughout the West in the early 20th century. While ostensibly founded to preserve frontier heritage, many were financed and controlled by the descendants of the very figures whose activities needed concealing. These organizations became the gatekeepers of frontier memory, carefully selecting which photographs entered public collections and which remained locked in private archives, or were destroyed altogether. The final photograph in our collection comes from neither a remote mining camp nor a lawless boomtown, but from Washington, D.C., circa 1902. It shows a gathering of industrial leaders, political figures, and financiers at an exclusive club. Among them are faces we've seen throughout our journey, older now, more respectable, their wild frontier days seemingly behind them. But the connection is unmistakable. The men who orchestrated the shadow governments of Deadwood and Bodie, who manipulated markets from Frisco and Thurmond, who built counterfeiting empires in Panamint, they didn't disappear when the frontier closed. They simply transformed. laundering both their fortunes and their reputations, emerging as the respected architects of 20th century America. This photograph too disappeared from public view shortly after it was taken. The photographer, a studio professional named Samuel Langhorne, found his business mysteriously struggling after copies began circulating among his wealthy clients. Within a year, he had closed his studio and left Washington. His glass plate negatives, including this image, were reportedly destroyed in a warehouse fire in 1904. A fire investigators at the time found suspicious, but were discouraged from pursuing too vigorously. The copy we present came to light in 2003, found among the personal effects of a former Treasury agent, whose family had kept it hidden for generations. His accompanying notes express alarm at recognizing so many faces connected to cases he had been explicitly ordered to abandon during his career. As we conclude this exploration of images banned from our historical consciousness, we're left with uncomfortable questions. How much of what we understand as American history has been similarly sanitized? What other photographs, documents, and artifacts remain hidden, suppressed by those whose power might be threatened by the truths they contain? The frontier mythology tells us the Wild West was tamed by brave lawmen and the forward march of civilization. These photographs suggest a more complex reality, that in many cases the law didn't defeat the outlaws. The outlaws simply became the law. The criminals didn't disappear. They incorporated. The corrupt systems weren't dismantled. They were institutionalized. Look closely at the final image, at the faces of men whose names now grace university buildings, charitable foundations, and corporate headquarters. Their journey from frontier saloons to the highest echelons of power represents perhaps the greatest sleight of hand in American history, one these photographs, long suppressed but now finally revealed, allow us to fully comprehend. There's a reason these images were banned, hidden, and in some cases, nearly destroyed. They tell a story that challenges everything we think we know about how America was built and who truly built it. They reveal not just forgotten towns and overlooked events, but the very architecture of power that continues to shape our world. The American frontier wasn't just a place or a time. It was the crucible in which modern systems of financial, political, and social control were forged. Often by the very outlaws, our sanitized history claims were defeated. These rare photographs, banned from our historical narrative for generations, finally allow us to see that process with clear eyes. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the shadows of American history. Remember, the past is never as simple as we're taught to believe, and the most important stories are often the ones most deliberately hidden from view. This has been Uncovered Images. Until next time, keep questioning the official narrative. There's always more beneath the surface.